Are you ready to take your first steps towards financial freedom by investing in property? Maybe you've started your portfolio but need some help continuing to grow. Lachlan Vidler and the team at Atlas Property Group are here to help. As experts in property investment, Lachlan and his team are ready to help you take advantage of some of the best investing conditions in almost 20 years. By completing the research, sourcing and negotiations, Lachlan goes the extra mile to find you a high-performing investment and set you on your path to financial freedom. Book in your free discovery call today at atlaspropertygroup.com.au.
This is a Momentum Media production.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
Hello everyone, Grace Ormsby here. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. And we are kicking off 2022 with an absolute bang. Everybody in the industry seems to be hitting the ground running, and it felt like the perfect point in time, from my perspective anyway, to get someone on board who has just been announced as the new president of the Real Estate Institute of Australia. Hayden Groves, welcome to the show.
Well, it's lovely to be with you. Thank you, Grace, for having me on. And yes, 2022, it might start with a bang. Hope it doesn't fade into a whimper as the year progresses.
I really hope that is not the case. All the indications are that it is going to be a cracker of a year, Hayden. First of all, congratulations on the new gig. Pretty exciting time.
Look, thank you. Yeah, coming off the back of COVID, and a big shout out to my predecessor, Adrian Kelly, who sat in the chair for 3 years and had some significant challenges during his time as REIA president. He sort of kicked it off in 2018, and then he had a federal election, which of course people will remember was fought very much on the negative gearing and capital gains tax changes that the opposition were touting at the time. And then no sooner had he sort of finished with that than COVID arrived on his plate. So he had to deal with all of those challenges, and also appointing a new CEO, the wonderful Anna Nilagama, who we appointed about a year ago now, has done a terrific job at REIA. So hats off to you, Adrian. You did a tremendous job. The industry thanks you very much for your service.
Yes, I'll second that sentiment, Adrian. If you are listening, thank you so much for all the work that you have done over the last couple of years. Hayden, you've been there pretty much beside him throughout a lot of that, haven't you?
I served as deputy president of the REIA when I was first elected there 7 years ago. And so I've gone through 3 presidents as deputy. And so it's a Victorian, New South Welsh and Taswegian. And now it's a West Australian's turn to step up. But I think those 3 predecessors have set a very good groundwork. It's done some great groundwork for me in the lead up to my tenure. So I'm very much looking forward to serving the industry. It is a great privilege and honour to represent the industry at the highest level. And so I aim to do my very best to make sure that real estate practitioners remain a crucial part of the real estate transaction, and just really making sure that the community understands that regulators and also understand that real estate agents are a crucial part of the community. We provide an essential service in many ways, helping people live the great Australian dream of home ownership, but not only that, managing properties for people and maintaining affordability for tenants. So we do an awful a lot of work, and we understand as real estate agents that we live and die by our communities. If we value our reputation and our integrity, we give an awful lot back to our communities, not just through supporting local footy clubs and whatnot, but also we make sure that we act ethically and professionally. So despite our reputation out there, it's a bit of a myth, really, urban myth that real estate agents are snake oil salesmen. It's really not the case. If you ask people, would you use that same real estate agent again? 9 out of 10 of them say, yes, we would. We loved our experience with our real estate agent. And so they're the sorts of things that I'll be looking to prosecute during my time as REIA president.
And we look forward to seeing that, because it is, as you said, real estate is such an important part of Australian society. And I want to get to some of the objectives of the REIA over the next 12 months. But before we do get into that, Hayden, for those that may not know you as an individual, you've been a highly successful agent yourself. Can you talk us through your background in real estate, how you sort of got into it in the first place?
Sure. Like many people, I think you don't necessarily set out to be a real estate agent. But I found myself in it. I was running a hospitality venture here in Fremantle, which is where my business is, many years ago now. And I noted that I was working sort of from 5 a.m. through to 7 p.m. most days. I had a young family. It was a pretty tough time in that regard. But my best customers were often real estate agents, and they seemed to be sitting around drinking coffee, whereas I was working pretty hard making the coffee for them, I guess. And so I got chatting with a couple of the local real estate practitioners here, and one of them offered me a job. His name was John Destridge, who'd been in business in Fremantle since 1979. And so I was very fortunate for me a job. I was even more fortunate that as I came into the business, many of his sales team had chosen to go elsewhere collectively. And so I walked into a business that had plenty of listings, and I had a good opportunity. So I really got hit the ground running. And then again, got lucky in 2004 when John and I agreed that I would buy his business. And back in Perth, for those of you who know the Perth market at all, 2004, the market took off. So shortly after I bought it, my timing couldn't have been more perfect. Everybody needed to buy an investment property back then, and sales transactions were very strong. So 2004 to 2006 were some of Perth's best years. We grew in that 1 year, 38% growth in our market. So that's kind of like Sydney numbers, isn't it? So I've been very fortunate, and I've run a business ever since. It's the sole independent agency in Fremantle called Destridge Groves.
Good on you. And I mean, those numbers are a little bit reminiscent of what we've been seeing Australia-wide through COVID-19. Do you feel like any periods of time have, throughout your career had prepared you for what COVID-19 would bring the industry?
I don't think anybody was really prepared what was going to happen with COVID. It was an extraordinary time. When you think about experienced economists coming out of CBA, Commonwealth Bank, predicted that property values in Australia with the onset of COVID would impact the markets by 20%. There'd be a 20% fall across the board in Australian property prices as well. Turns out they're about 40% out, and properties values went the other way by 20%. So, I think people with COVID looking for that security of tenure, obviously people working from home and doing Zoom, compared to in the past when they would travel around, it just became so important that your home was even more your castle, wasn't it? People needed to have, not only did they look for the perfect home where they could have to work from home, but I think people were looking for sort of their final home rather than using the property ladder, so to speak, to move through properties. They were looking for aspirationally, perhaps even their more final, more permanent home that perhaps might last them for 10 to 20 years. So that might be an interesting change to the market as we learn to live with COVID. Obviously, no more lockdowns is going to be a common theme around Australia. Even the great Republic of Western Australia is going to open its borders in February, which will be a welcome change to many people. And I think that the Perth market has been, amongst Australia, has been the most restrained. The West Australian market's only gone up about 8.3% on one measure, which is the REIA's figures in the last 12 months to the end of September this year. You can contrast that with Hobart, and up over 30%, Sydney obviously more than 30%. So I think perhaps we're looking towards this year transactional levels in the East Coast markets perhaps coming away a little bit, not being quite as strong as it was in the peak of the COVID period. And the Perth market, I think, will actually open up even more so. So I think in terms of a standout market, I would not be surprised to see West Australia lead the way, or start to lead the way in the back half of 2022.
There's definitely some good news there. We're going to take a quick break there, Hayden, but we'll be back soon with some more of those predictions and expectations. And there's plenty more to unpack as well from the brand new REIA president. We'll be back with you soon.
Looking for a blue chip Gold Coast investment property, or trying to relocate to the beautiful sunny Gold Coast but keep missing out on the right properties? Maybe you need an expert on the ground to source the right property for you. The Srama Group are the leading recommended buyers agency specific to the Gold Coast, providing their clients with exclusive off-market property opportunities, specific insights into market, combined with a large network of dedicated professionals to ensure you make the right decision without the hassle. Get in touch with us at thesramagroup.com.au and secure your financial freedom today.
Welcome back to this episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. I'm joined by Hayden Groves, the REIA president. Hayden, this is a very exciting period for you. And before we get back into some of those predictions, I do want to ask, because obviously we mentioned before you being the deputy president for a while, what was the actual workload like during COVID? A lot of people wouldn't realise, REIA was producing very regular updates, but I don't think people would understand, just how much time and effort was actually going into these kind of things from your perspective.
Look, we do. REIA spends a great deal of time liaising, not only doing the research, undertaking the research, a lot of grunt work and going through numbers and documents and sourcing information from lots of different sectors, CoreLogic and Domain and realestate.com and others, of course, the Australian Bureau of Statistics and whatnot. So we go through and wade through an awful lot of information. There's a lot of grunt work that does go on there. It's important to note that a lot of that work actually just formulates up our policy platforms. And so, from that information that we're getting, feedback from the markets, and perhaps even more importantly from the community, what the community think of real estate agents and the manner in which they're conducting themselves. That enables us to formulate up policy platforms, which will allow us then to go to government with those policy platforms. So we've got one that's developing over the next few years called Axe the Tax, which is all about looking at genuinely having to look at stamp duty in state jurisdictions. Obviously, they're different in every state, and it is a state-based tax. We get that. From our perspective, we understand that it is a state responsibility. But stamp duty is just an insidious tax that really, whilst it earns state governments a disproportionate amount of money, it's a really lumpy tax. I mean, you wouldn't want to be a treasurer in the state trying to predict what the stamp duty revenue is going to be going forward in the forward estimates. I mean, New South Wales government, for example, would be astonished to see that 51% of their income at the moment is from stamp duty transfers. Of course, it doesn't last forever. And so you might be predicting that you're going to be receiving really solid revenues, but if New South Wales market suddenly changes, that revenue base is no longer there. So it's an inefficient tax in that regard. Western Australia, for example, in 2009, so we're the lowest level of property transactions in 30 years. There's no one can predict that to be the case. And so revenue from stamp duty is therefore very anemic. And so it makes it very hard to budget. So that's one of the reasons why we think that there needs to be a very serious look at, from a federal perspective, very serious look at trying to make some significant changes to the way that stamp duty is assessed around states. So that's just one example of the very many work, a lot of the work that the REIA does, making sure that the sustainability is going to be another big one, I think, going forward for REIA, working with state governments, working with local governments, and working with our other stakeholders and key associations like the UDIA, for example, about sustainability in the state. Because, of course, with climate change being a very real and present challenge and danger, real estate is not immune from it, and we need to be fully immersed and engaged with it, getting solutions for the community going forward.
I love that you didn't even mention COVID-19 then. There's, just so many things going on that aren't this present thing that we're all kind of stuck on. And obviously that Axe the Tax has been something that has been, a very big topic of discussion in recent years. But I would love to ask you, Hayden, have you seen COVID-19 exacerbate that debate, or was it always kind of going to come to this climax in this decade?
Look, I think it was always there. I think when markets are strong, which the market nationally has been during the COVID period, stamp duty and affordability and stamp duty, things like that become very much a topic of strong conversation, particularly when you've got rental affordability constraints and challenges. As soon as rents become unaffordable, you start to see things like happen in Tasmania, where state and local governments had to open up, work together and open up football ovals and school ovals for people to camp on, in order to just house people. It should never get to that in this country. But it does, because there's not enough incentives for property investors, mum and dad property investors, to buy investment property, to provide enough supply in the market to make sure that rents are affordable. And so COVID, I guess, has shone a spotlight on rental affordability and housing affordability more broadly. first home buyers and the challenge the first home buyers. All of these things have been, I guess, come to the fore because of COVID, but only because COVID has delivered a very strong real estate market since it's been here and since COVID's been with us. If the opposite had occurred, if the Commonwealth Bank had been right and we'd seen a 20% fall in property values across Australia during 2020 and into 2021, then, we wouldn't be talking about affordability so much. We would be talking about falling balance sheets in Australian households. That's just nothing. And so, yes, COVID has revealed the challenges around affordability, but I don't think it's just down to COVID. It's just when any market rises through the natural cycles of ups and downs of property markets around Australia, it's either you're talking about affordability or you're talking about property prices devaluing and causing lots of other problems in the society as a result.
Yeah, some good points there, especially this year we do have a federal election in the mix, which probably has brought forward some of those affordability issues as well. We have heard that housing will become a bit of a federal issue at this election. It's going to be something that is quite widely debated. What are your thoughts on that? What are you sort of seeing as, we obviously are only crystal ball gazing here. No one take, what we're talking about right now as fact going forward. But it is true that there's going to be, a few issues that do arise, and housing will be one of them.
Look, you're right. And certainly ideologically, obviously the opposition had previously brought to the election one of dozens of policies in their agenda last time round about removing negative gearing incentives for investment, and of course halving the capital gains tax discount that property investors and other investment vehicles enjoy. I think that, obviously this time around the opposition's making themselves a very small target. They're not talking about property taxes or property-related policies per se. They, of course, may reveal themselves early in the new year as we head to a federal election in March or May this year. They're the two most likely months that we can predict a federal election being held. I've got a feeling that I don't think the opposition will try to reintroduce anything too dramatic in that space. I think the federal government have done a pretty good job in housing. The fact that we do have a housing minister is a good thing, and that came about from REIA's very good work a few years ago. We lobbied hard to make sure that we got ourselves a housing minister at the federal level, and we've got quite a senior politician in Michael Sukkar as our housing minister. And Labor, if they win the next election, which of course is quite possible because the polls are suggesting that they will win, but we know what polls can do, don't we? They can be right. They can be wrong. But I think that overall property, we must remember that in Australia, we're approaching $9 trillion worth of real estate value of real estate in this country. To put that into context, that's sort of more than double if you put together all of the superannuation pool of Australians, which is an enormous amount of money, together with the entire value of all the commercial real estate in Australia, as well as the entire ASX, Australian Stock Exchange. The value of all of those three things only make up about half of residential real estate value in this country. So it's a really important sector. And I think federal governments have long neglected it, not really looked at it in terms of genuine supply issues to the market to address affordability, because affordability has always been hinged on supply and lack of supply, nothing more, nothing less. But then you've got the challenge of Australians wanting to live out the great Australian dream, buying their own home, having their own piece of real estate. They're not interested in seeing those values go backwards. They want them to progress and go forwards, but in a sustainable way. And so there are some significant challenges that transgress federal, state and local government. And I don't think there's been enough coordination between those three government enterprises in the past. And REIA calls on the federal government now and any other future federal government that is formed that they have a proper look at Australian real estate and work more closely with state governments and local governments so you have this less fragmented approach to real estate policy, particularly around planning and supply issues in their efforts to address affordability.
How's that conversation going with the government? Has it progressed much? Are there things going on in the background? Obviously, there might be things that you can't really talk about now, but, is it looking positive? What can investors and first home buyers and owner occupiers, who are maybe looking to transact in the next year, what should they be feeling like at the moment?
Well, I think that is the risk there. Our relationship with the federal government now is very good, and as I said before, having a housing minister in Michael Sukkar is a great step in that direction. We can coordinate things through one department rather than various others. And so that's a terrific benefit. For example, let's take the home loan scheme that the federal government has pushed out there, which effectively a deposit scheme that they've announced and are running now, which allows first-time buyers to get into their homes only with a 5% deposit, and most single mums finding themselves single parents as little as a 2% deposit. Basically, it doesn't add any further liquidity into the market, this policy. It's good policy because what it does is it doesn't unnecessarily inflate property values. What it does do is it underwrites the loan effectively, just guarantees the loan and makes sure that the mortgage insurance isn't necessary to pay the mortgage insurance. And that's a significant impost in terms of affordability. So that scheme is brilliant. It's rolled out very well. So they're the sorts of policies that mean that we can have, across the country, about 30% of all buying activity being first-time buyers, and that's a pretty good number. It's been as low as in March 2017, as low as 15% of the market. And so it's terrific to see first-time buyers still very strongly active in this market, in this country. And those sorts of schemes and those sorts of policy settings by the federal government have been very good. And I hope that if Labor do form government the next election, they maintain that scheme and look to other schemes. Look at, for example, drawing on superannuation. I know that would be a very touchy topic, particularly from a future Labor government. Young people accessing their superannuation to form up a deposit in order to get into their first home. But we know from research that we've done that people's mental health and sense of security is enhanced by home ownership. And it's really important that we encourage, in a sensible way, in a thoughtful way, home ownership in this country. It remains a critical component of our community's well-being as a society going forward.
Good to know, Hayden. We're going to take another quick break there. We'll be back soon with more from the new REIA president.
The mark of financial success isn't about getting bigger, better, faster or more. To Paul, success is freedom. Freedom to spend more time with his family, or giving back to his community, or just more time to go surfing. Paul Glossop, an award-winning property buyer and regular guest on the Smart Property Investment Podcast, has taken the lessons he's learned building a multi-million-dollar property portfolio and laid them out in his best-selling book, A Surfer's Guide to Property Investing. For a limited time, get your free copy of Paul's award-winning book and receive a roadmap for building both lifestyle and wealth through property investing. Grab your free copy today at purepropertyinvestment.com.
Welcome back to this episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. I'm joined by Hayden Groves. We're kicking off 2022 with a bang, the new REIA president. We've been talking about federal election, what to expect from 2022, Hayden. I think it seems pretty positive at this point in time. Obviously, the election could have some issues arising there, but for investors specifically, I know we haven't really touched on them yet, but you were talking earlier about that sustainable price growth being expected through this year. And that does all seem pretty promising from my perspective.
I think so. Money is still so cheap, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
We've never had such cheap money available. And that's likely to continue, certainly through 2022. Most people are a lot smarter than me, predicting that they're going to see some potential uplift in interest rates in the back half of, or mid to back half of 2023. And so that should mean that 2022 will be still quite a strong year. I think in certain markets, they are coming up against affordability constraint. The Sydney market, you can't continue to grow at 30+% year on year. Some people just start to run out of money. They just can't afford houses. And so I think the Sydney market might come back a bit, won't grow quite as strong in 2022. Melbourne market, probably because, the world's most locked down city, Coming out of lockdown, I think they will be quite buoyant in their markets in 2022. And so I'd say that I predict that we'll see quite high levels of property transactions in Victoria, soak up some of that part of the investment supply that they've got there, which has come under a fair bit of constraint in recent times. So I think that market will be one to watch. Queensland will go quite well. Brisbane market obviously very strong already. Tasmania, I think, will perhaps go the same way that the Sydney market is likely to go in 2022. I think that'll come back a little bit. Still grow, but won't be quite as aggressive in its growth. South Australia might also moderate. Generally speaking, the South Australian markets are normally just very consistent. They just seem to have a nice, even growth trajectory over a long period of time. So they're experiencing a bit of a spike in 2021, and I think that will perhaps moderate. And the Perth market, I think, has got a lot of blue sky. There's something like 50,000 people due to come into Western Australia once the borders finally open on February the 5th. And there's just not enough houses for them living here. So that's going to put serious pressure on affordability in Western Australia in terms of rents. And that's not just Perth, but in the regions as well, and house prices. And so I think the Perth market will probably shine quite brightly in 2022. And those other markets like ACT, obviously, coming off the back of very strong growth, particularly rental growth in 2021. I think investors will continue to look at, particularly in the commercial sector. I think investors are coming out of those Melbourne, Sydney markets and looking for Canberra. And the Darwin market, obviously, if there's some big projects up there, defence plays, that sort of thing, the Darwin market always responds very well to those kinds of events. So overall, a pretty positive year, I reckon, for Australian real estate in 2022.
Heard it here first from Hayden Groves, the REA president. Hayden, before you do go, I do feel like I need to ask you a bit of a question. It feels a bit sideways, but we have been talking politics and borders, especially with WA being a hard border for so long. But I hear that you've struck up a little bit of a relationship recently with the West Australian Premier. You may have sold some of his property earlier last year.
Right. I did. I was fortunate enough that Mark McGowan and his lovely family invited me to market and promote for sale a vacant lot that they chopped off the back of their existing home. Their children are all growing up, and so they don't need such a big backyard anymore. And they live in a beautiful part of Rockingham on the bay there, with an oceanfront property, which it sounds like it would be a very expensive part of the world to live, but it's not. In Western Australia, it's a southern suburb of Perth, a fair bit out of Perth, but it is a beautiful part of the world. And so, so the McGowans have sold off their back block, and I was fortunate enough to be asked to be their agent. I'd met the Premier previously in my role as the State Institute President for REIA, and so he was elected as Premier. And of course, in our advocacy and lobbying efforts, I got an opportunity to meet with him. I must say he's delightful company, despite some of the criticisms that he cops, but for being, a bit too stringent with his border controls and whatnot. His state election result here should speak volumes that basically created a war chest of in terms of the numbers in the parliament. I think there's two Liberals left in the whole parliament of Western Australia. And so he's a very popular Premier. He makes a mean cup of tea. Whenever I go over to visit, he makes me a cup of tea. And his lovely wife makes a very good batch of biscuits. So I'm always very happy to be going over there and talking real estate with them. And we end up, of course, talking about lots of other things as well, mostly real estate related, of course, as you'd expect.
I bet. And it's a good connection to have, especially now that you've, the REIA president. You might be having a few more conversations with him down the track, but great for you to share that. We might have to get Mark McGowan on an upcoming episode of our Smart Property Investment podcast at some point if he's doing some investing himself.
Well, it would be great to see. I think he's, I don't think property is really his thing, but certainly I think his wife, Sarah, is very much into real estate. She loves it. She's right, always looking out there, property, interested in it. And of course, politicians, they generally don't own lots of real estate. They tend to be pretty much more focused on their political careers and their constituents and their communities. They don't tend to be property developers per se. And the McGowan family are not in that category either. But they are interested in real estate, which is a great thing. because if you are a clinical lead, you need to be interested in real estate because of the reasons I mentioned before about how important it is for small Australians.
Absolutely. Very good to know. Put in a good word for me, please.
Will do.
Hayden, it's been so lovely to chat with you today. Thank you so much. I know you must be really, really busy at the moment, but best of luck with the role. We can't wait to continue this conversation, obviously, over the coming months and years. REB will be reporting a lot on this, and so will Smart Property Investment, our sister platform. So great to start the conversation here, and I can't wait to see, where it ends up next.
Grace, thank you so much for having me, and wish everybody a Merry Christmas. And I'm hoping for everybody that they have a very prosperous 2022.
Looking forward to it, Hayden. Thank you again. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. If you have any questions for anyone here behind the scenes of Smart Property Investment, don't hesitate to reach out at editor@smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. As always, make sure you're staying up to date with the latest Smart Property Investment news on our website and our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and our LinkedIn. That's all we do have time for today. Until next time, stay safe and well. Bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.
Looking to secure finance to maximise your returns on your investment property? Finny can help. With access to over 70 lenders, Finny can find the right finance for your unique situation. So whether you're ready to refinance for a better rate, improve your cash flow, release equity to grow your portfolio, or are looking to find the right finance for your next purchase, we're here to help. Visit finny.com.au today to learn more.